There is a quiet moment in life, not loud, not dramatic, not cinematic. It comes when expectations break, not people. It comes when you realize something that stings a little at first and then slowly heals you forever. Nobody owes you anything. Not your parents, not your friends, not your children, not society, not even life itself. And strangely, that realization doesn't make life colder, it makes it clearer. We are not born entitled, we are slowly taught it. As children, life feels like a promise. When we cry, someone picks us up. When we fall, someone runs toward us. When we are hungry, food appears as if by magic. So, somewhere in that innocence, a silent belief is planted. The world is designed to respond to me, and we carry this belief into adulthood without even noticing. A young boy grows up thinking his parents will always understand him. A girl believes her efforts will always be appreciated. A student assumes hard work automatically guarantees fairness in results. A friend thinks loyalty will always be returned. But life never signed this agreement. There's a story of a young man who once told his father, I will take care of you when you are old, because you took care of me. The father smiled and said nothing. Years later, when expectations were not met on either side, both felt betrayed. But no one had broken a rule, only an assumption. The illusion is simple but powerful. If I give, I must receive. And this illusion quietly becomes the root of most disappointments in life. Because life is not a marketplace of emotional investments. It is not a balance sheet. It is a flow, sometimes giving, sometimes not. The sooner we realize that the world does not owe us fairness, recognition, or return, the sooner we stop living in silent contracts that were never signed. And in that realization, the first seed of freedom is planted. Everyone remembers their first emotional wound, not the one that broke the body, but the one that broke expectation. Maybe it was a friend who promised to stay but slowly disappeared. Maybe it was someone you supported during their hardest time, who forgot you when your turn came. Or maybe it was family where love felt uneven, where effort didn't feel matched. There is a moment when you sit alone and think, but I did everything right, then why did this happen? That sentence is where suffering begins. I once heard about a man who helped a colleague build his career. He mentored him, supported him financially during a crisis, even defended him when others doubted him. Years later, when that colleague got promoted, he didn't even return a phone call. The man said quietly, I didn't lose a friend. I lost an expectation. And that is the turning point many never understand. Disappointment is not in people. It is in the gap between what we expected and what reality offered. The pain feels personal, but it is actually structural, built on invisible assumptions that others must respond to our goodness in equal measure. But life doesn't work like arithmetic. Good deeds are not stored in a cosmic bank account for guaranteed withdrawals. When this truth hits the heart for the first time, it feels unfair, even cruel. But slowly, if you sit with it long enough, you realize something deeper. Nobody was ever obliged to repay your emotional investment. And strangely, that realization hurts at first, but it also begins to unshackle you. There is a quiet shift in life that changes everything. It is the moment you stop asking, why didn't they treat me the way I treated them? And start asking, why did I believe they must? This is not cynicism. This is clarity. A man once shared that he spent years feeling hurt by friends who never checked on him. One day, he stopped and asked himself, did I ever ask them to carry that responsibility? The answer was no. He had assumed it. And assumptions, when unspoken, become invisible chains. The turning point is painful because it dismantles the identity of being the giver or the good one who deserves return. But once that identity softens, something beautiful emerges: freedom from expectation. You stop measuring people, you stop tracking emotional debts, you stop living like a judge in a courtroom of relationships. Instead, you start seeing life as it is, not as you demanded it to be. This clarity does not make you cold, it makes you conscious. You still love, you still give, but you no longer attach conditions to it. And that is the beginning of peace. The heaviest relationships are not those filled with conflict, but those filled with expectations. When you expect your children to validate your every sacrifice, you suffer. When you expect your partner to always understand without explanation, you suffer. When you expect friends to always be available, you suffer. Because expectation quietly turns love into pressure. But something changes when you realize nobody owes you anything. You begin to say, I love you, but I don't own your responses. I care for you, but I won't control your choices. There is a beautiful story of an elderly woman whose children lived abroad. She rarely spoke to them, not because they didn't care, but because she refused to demand constant attention. When asked if she felt neglected, she said, I raised them to fly, not to stay in my cage of expectations. And strangely, her children visited her more often not out of obligation, but out of love. When relationships are freed from debt, they breathe. You start appreciating small gestures instead of demanding grand proofs. And love, in its purest form, begins to return not as duty, but as choice. At first, letting go of expectations feels like loss. The mind whispers, if I expect nothing, I will receive nothing. But reality works differently. When you stop waiting, you start living. You are no longer trapped in the waiting room of they should call, they should notice, they should understand. There is a man who once said, I used to check my phone constantly for messages that never came. Now I check it only when I want to, not when I hope. That small shift changes everything. Freedom is not getting everything you want. Freedom is no longer being disturbed by what you don't get. When nobody owes you anything, every kindness becomes a gift instead of a right. And gratitude replaces frustration. Life becomes lighter because you are no longer negotiating with reality. You are simply experiencing it. There was an old gardener who had planted trees his entire life. Someone once asked him, do you plant trees knowing you may never enjoy their shade? He smiled and said, I plant them because planting is my nature, not because shade is my reward. That is acceptance. To give without keeping score, to love without keeping account, to live without demanding return. Because the truth is simple, life does not owe us fairness, appreciation, or repayment. And once you accept that fully, not just intellectually, but deeply, something soft opens in the heart. Peace. Entitlement says, I deserve this. Grace says, I am grateful I received this. One creates pressure, the other creates peace. When entitlement dissolves, even small moments feel meaningful, a call from a friend, a shared smile, a quiet evening. You stop feeling ignored and start feeling included in life itself. There is a profound shift here. You no longer live as someone waiting to be treated well, but as someone already content with existence. And strangely, when you stop demanding, life often becomes kinder, not because it changed, but because your perception did. The moment you realize nobody owes you anything is not the end of hope. It is the beginning of emotional maturity. You stop living like a receiver waiting for the world to pay you back, and start living like a giver who has already received enough simply by being alive. And in that silence, there is no bitterness, only understanding. And in that understanding, there is peace that no expectation can disturb.